Hey Phantom, so before we begin this video, I just want to say thank you so much for a fantastic 2023. It was a really great video, or year, I don't know why I said video, but a great collection of videos, I guess. And I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You guys are amazing, and let's see what we can do in 2024. Before we begin, can you please leave a like on this video, a share, and subscribe, because these videos don't do really well, the shorter ones. And I wanted to give you guys something a little bit different. So if you could please do that, I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And let's begin. I was going through a very difficult time in my life. I'd just been furloughed from a company where I thought I could retire from comfortably after 5 years of service. I was separated and soon to be divorced. I had a young daughter to provide for. I'd been asking God to come into my life to help me. A job opened up in another state, 300 miles from my daughter and parents. Normally, I would have never considered such a move, but it felt necessary. I rented an apartment in a very small town, moved in the first few belongings that I had, and started the first job. Every night I would cry out to God, proclaiming Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and asking for guidance. I was extremely depressed and had a difficult time. Even thoughts of taking my life entered the picture. One bright sunny Saturday afternoon, I awoke to the ominous feeling of a presence in my room. Lying on my stomach diagonally across the bed, I could sense someone or something behind me. My normal reaction would have been to jump out of the bed and confront this intruder. However, I couldn't even move. It was as though I was paralyzed. Not from fear. I just couldn't move. I was not panicked in any way. In fact, I was quite calm and amazed myself of that fact. Suddenly, I felt what could only be described as a large hand, cradling the back of my head. Much the same as my father did when I was a child. Much the same as I had done with my daughter. There was no possible way that a human could have done so without kneeling on the bed, or standing directly in front of me, in my sight. From that point on, I knew firsthand that God was present and working in my life. I then began trusting in Him and allowing the difficulties in my life to be worked out. Several months later, I quit the job, moved back home with no job to go to, and found one, a good one, within a month. There are still moments that occur in my life that cause feelings of hurt and betrayal, but I always think back to that awesome moment when God laid His hand upon my head. If it wasn't God, then it must have been one of His angels. I have always felt and knew that angels truly exist in this world. I've become in touch with my empathetic emotions for many years. However, truthfully, I didn't realize how special I was with my gifts to see auras, and yes, angels. Many times I've seen shadows standing near or behind people I know and strangers. I have often described the shadows and strangers would acknowledge who it was, such as strange nuances, as a side part hairstyle, or a bun worn by grandma, short shadows, portly shadows. Lots of conspicuous descriptions that validated that I wasn't nuts. Anyway, when my dad died, I had a hard time with his sudden death. My 6'2" strong World War II Master Sergeant General dad had died. How could he have left me? I cried and I cried and cried for years. I got lost with my faith and quite morose and morbid with the graveyard. I would go there often, then have picnics and talk to him, and would introduce my newly born children. One hot summer day, I decided to present my son to my dad. I said, "Look, Daddy, I gave him your middle name." The city of Kolno was blazing hot that afternoon while I spoke to the cement maker. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew my straw hat tumbling off my head. That red chapnoo rolled down fresh green grass and headstones rapidly. I chased that hat while cradling my 2-month-old son. Finally, that brim stopped. I gladly picked it up. I was shocked. My son's name was inscribed on that marker. Some deceased soul that had passed 20 years before, my dad came to me in the graveyard and he promptly kicked me out. I've never been back. That incident resonated on my heart for days. I went to church looking for answers. The pastor spoke about many ways to gain faith and strength. However, what he ended the sermon with was, God is not among the dead. He is among the living. Thank you, Pop. I love you too. I would like to think that my story, my experience, will persuade at least one non-believer. But let's face it, most of who don't believe won't until something extraordinary or divine happens to them. I think for the most part, objects like angels and Christ and Satan are like subjects of UFOs and afterlife and reincarnation for me. Its existence is believed in, yet I can't definitively say it is real, because I've never actually witnessed it. I have, moreover, witnessed the real and true powers of both good and evil, Christ against Satan, and I'm ecstatic that I've found a place to share the details. There was a time in my life that was devilishly dark and deep with despair, one that I hope never to repeat. My then husband had for 10 years been physically abusive, explosively emotionally abusive, and so psychologically tormenting that by end's time, the abuse generated a mental illness of my own. I was persecuted by my friends, abandoned by my family and husband, shunned by the community, and ultimately suffered the temporary removal of my children as a result of the aforementioned. That time was literally my hell on earth. Needless to say, I forgot about God. In truth, I had zero faith. It never even occurred to me to pray. They say that when the mental, emotional, and spiritual conditions and environment, or lack thereof, is right, the conception for a perfect feeding ground for evil and its inhabitants are prime. At that time, it was normal for me to feel afraid, fear the dark, and sense others' presence. Routinely, I saw shadow people. Then I heard things thrown in the dark, heard whispers and two-way conversations, even when my family was intact, though we would all experience paranormal phenomena, so I blew it off as normal. What became abnormal, however, was my increased agitation and intense fear, nightly paralyzing nightmares, and the sudden yet repeated homicidal, suicidal thoughts. I had literally become obsessed or possessed, and even felt comforted by the idea and daydreams of murdering my husband and killing myself. I had it all worked out, and even started the note. Looking back, I still wonder if I created my own demon, like a poltergeist, but wherever it came from. No matter by whom it was created, it feverishly fueled my desired determination to make my husband pay, at all costs. One night I had attempted to fall asleep and felt the usual, someone staring at me. This particular stare, however, felt different. It felt more ominous, insidious, and invasive. It felt intelligent, with direction or purpose. This felt personal, vile, and evil. Lying on my right side, I felt the entity stand only feet from me. Intimidated by fear and feeling vulnerable with my back to open space, I changed positions and laid on my back. As quickly as it took for me to roll over was as quickly it took the demon to hover immediately above me. I just knew we were nose to nose, within milliliters. I could feel this entity's shape and outline. I could feel its hateful eyes beam through mine, though closed. I could feel its true, deliberate disgust and relentless wanton intention. Me. I literally felt trapped. I felt oxygen escape me. I felt my heart pound so heavily that I remember thinking I'm going to have a heart attack. Unable to clutch my blankets or shut my eyes any tighter, I prayed to every single man, woman, and angel in heaven. I prayed like never before. I prayed to Jesus. I prayed to God, the Holy Spirit. I prayed to every angel I could remember. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael. I prayed to and begged Mother Mary, my guardian angels, my spirit guides, even my deceased grandfather, whom I've never even knew. By God, I was understandably petrified. After what felt like a handful of time, I suddenly felt this overwhelming, radiating, most intensifying, comfortable, beautiful, flawless warmth that encompassed my entire body. It began in my chest, presumably because that's where I prayed, and it extended to and through every fiber of my being. Instantaneously, I felt perfectly protected. Complete trust, relief, relaxation, and above all, I felt pure, unadulterated, unconditional love. There was this inexplicable and indescribable feathery lightness too, and in the air, that magically erased the most horrific moments of my life. In fact, so captured and captivated by the events, I think for a moment's time I forgot about the danger that just seconds before nearly sent me over the edge. I don't know how long the battle really lasted, but I do know it seemed almost immediately when I felt safe. I never felt as if I floated, but I did feel like I was sheltered in an impenetrable bubble. That's what it must feel like for a newborn to be wrapped and nestled into his mother's arms after birth. I thought that anyway. Complete contentment and happiness and joy. I never saw light, but knew what had just happened was from the light of God. I never heard voices. I knew it was God's words that saved me. I never felt a physical touch. I knew God touched me in every imaginable way. And for a lifetime, I seemed to instinctively know these things, like a mother instinctively knows when her infant is hungry. And still to this day, in fact right now, I become teary-eyed remembering the beautiful, peaceful works of the Lord. Still today, I have trouble comprehending how and why Jesus Christ saved literal me. But whatever the reason, I'm eternally grateful and literally owe my life and sanity to the Lord. You can imagine how still I slept that one forgettable night. Talk about waking up and feeling rejuvenated. After that night, uncomfortable life briefly continued on for me, but my negative attitude and outlook did not. I was suddenly able to see the good through the bad, and was able to maintain love where once surrounded in hate. In time, I transformed into a healthy spiritual being. After the years, many passing events, I am today convinced I know why all of the evil and hardship and loss happened, and for whom it was intended to help. And while I never wish to endure the pain and humiliation again, I wouldn't change a single moment in time or the appreciation of the thereafter. Shamefully, I do sometimes allow life's stresses and surprises to get the better of me, but that's partly why I'm writing, to rediscover all of my life's lessons so that I will be prepared for my next demanding journey. I would love to have discussions and such with those who are serious. Thank you for reading my story. On the evening of Sunday, May 2nd, 2009, around 8:30 p.m., I pulled away from a friend's house about 100 miles from my home. We'd spent the day eating, sightseeing, and eating again. During dinner, I drank a tall glass of iced tea, something I don't usually drink. My friend had suggested I go a different route home from what I intended, simply because it was all interstate instead of two-lane winding roads. As I got out on the highway, I remembered to pray that God would give me a safe drive home. Lord, please give me some traveling mercies. I prayed. It was extremely unusual for me to be able to drive very far, sometimes even across town, without getting sleepy, but I guess the caffeine in the tea was keeping me alert. I put a favorite Christian accompaniment track CD in the player and started my 2-hour trip home. My thoughts wandered to thinking about how quickly one could get into a serious car accident while traveling at high speeds down the interstate. There was bad weather ahead of me, but I was confident that I would miss it. I never even ran into any rain. I don't know how far I was from home when I started thinking seriously about dying from an automobile accident. My thoughts about how quickly I would die as opposed to feeling a lot of pain. I wondered how it would be. The next thing I knew was that I was starting to have problems with my vision. In the past, I had experienced something referred to as optical migraines that had occurred probably about 25 years ago, and I might have had a half a dozen of these experiences since that time. Well, this time I saw some little zigzag flashy lights, sort of like lightning bolts of lightning, on the outer corners of I think each eye. I thought of pulling off to the road, and then I decided I was doing alright. I concentrated very hard on staying in the outside lane where traffic was moving, about 80 miles per hour. This is the last thing that I remember until I was very suddenly aware of a vehicle in front of me, and that I was approaching it very fast. I quickly said, "Oh God," as I hit my brakes, causing my car to spin out of control. I do not know whether my eyes closed or whether I fought with the steering wheel. All I knew is that I was getting ready to take my last breath, and I wondered if it would be quick, or if I would feel the pain. Then I felt a jolt from behind, and another severe jolt from the front. The front end of my car had smashed head-on to the guardrail. This happened at around 10:30 p.m., roughly 2 miles before I was to take the exit that was only 1.5 miles from my home. I quickly opened my car door and got out because I had always feared being trapped in a burning car. I walked along the guardrail while I thanked Jesus over and over, when someone stopped to help and asked me if I were okay. I had to look down to make sure everything was intact. We've all heard of stories that people go through harrowing experiences and don't realize how badly they've been hurt. The only thing that was hurting was my left arm and hand. They had apparently been hit by one of the airbags that deployed. I will cut my story off right here and not bore you with any more details. The whole reason for sharing this with you is to tell you that thoughts ran through my mind after I finally got home from the emergency room the next morning. Remember the prayer I prayed just as I was leaving town? Well, here's my childish vision at age 59 of what God did for me. Angel, do you see my child down there? You see, she's in the silver Toyota heading west on I-59. No, that one over there. She prayed a couple hours ago that I would grant her traveling mercies. So my plans have changed. This is going to be her time, but I'm going to answer her prayers. Now please go down there and keep her from killing herself. Maybe that's not what happened, but I like to think it happened sorta like that. 2 years ago in 1997 when I was 17, I had a dream about my great-grandmother who died when I was 4 years old. I can still remember to this day asking my mom and grandmother if I could go to see my great-grandmother. She had cancer and chose to die at home with her family. I was told that I could not see her because she was so sick. I was told, however, that I had seen her once and was scared of her because of the way she looked. My mom and grandmother thought that I was scared again to see her, so they thought that it was best that I did not see her. 2 days later, she passed away. It was May 5th, 1997, which by coincidence was also my grandmother's birthday. I had the dream early that morning, and I remember it very well. I was at this park and was on a play structure running around and being a kid again. It was strange all of a sudden, because now that I look back on it, it was almost like a force guided me to sit down at the top of the structure. When I sat down on the structure, I noticed that there was still stand, but when I looked up, I saw that there was a curtain in the corner and was blowing, as it would have. Had the windows in the house been open? I was quite puzzled. When the curtain moved, I saw my great-grandmother, as I had remembered. She was wearing a long maroon dress with a brownish-colored sweater. Her black shoes and her gray hair, which went all the way down to her ankles, was tied up in a bun, like she always had it. She always seemed to be standing, but at the same time floating. I was so shocked that I was scared but also excited. I said in a scared and excited tone, "Great-grandma?" I remember her smiling, then the curtain blowing in front of her, and then she was gone. I often feel a really strong presence around me, and believe that it is her watching over me. I am thankful and grateful that she watches over me. I want her to know that I miss her, and think about her every day, and also that I love her. I know angels do exist. I have a lot of mini encounters about how angels actually save us from danger, but this one that happened last night was the most memorable one of all. Me and my family, my 4 kids, my mom, my sister, my husband, and our nanny were driving last night after watching a movie. We were in 2 separate cars. 3 of us kids were with my husband in another car while I drive my car, and with me were my sister who was sitting up with me in front, my 7.5-month-old baby, with her nanny and my mom. I told my husband to stay with us and lead our way. We were both driving at a speed of 80 kilometers an hour. Distance between our cars was like a car and a half apart. As I was slowly driving, watching my husband drive ahead, I suddenly felt weakness trembling, and something was like telling me that something is going to happen. I don't know how to call the feeling. They were like the sights or manifestations of events that showed something's really about to happen. While I watched my husband's car closely, 3 of my kids are with him. As I felt this and as I saw these manifestations, I started whispering prayers to myself over and over again, saying, God, please protect us. Please protect my children. Please keep us alive. Repeatedly for about 3 to 5 minutes. While trembling and feeling weak at the same time, this car suddenly appeared from nowhere, swerved to where I was, hit the front of my car, because I saw and felt it as my car kind of lifted from the ground to the right for a few seconds, and we were all shaken inside. I don't know what happened next. All I felt was that my feet didn't move an inch. Even my hand were still on the steering wheel motionless, but my car was gliding smoothly. And I was just like waiting for something to happen. Suddenly I heard my sister and my mom say, go to the side shoulder because you have been hit. Only then that I realized that I needed to move my hands and my feet so I can slowly shoulder to the right of the highway. While doing this, another car was doing the same thing since he was also hit. I told that man to check my car because I couldn't do it myself. I was still trembling with what happened. He said no damage and asked me if I was okay. I saw their car with dents on the right. My husband checked on me too. Fortunately, they were not hit. As I moved along the highway slowly, I saw around maybe 5 or 6 cars who were also hit the same incident. All of their cars were damaged, either the left or the right of the rear part. One lost a bumper. It was a strange sight seeing all of these cars, while I move away in deep thought thinking why my car was spared. As we remember the story from last night till now, we know very well that there was an angel right there with us, who saved us from a clear danger. I was really thankful that my family went home all safe and unscathed and unhurt. This experience will be remembered to the last breath of my life.
First off, I'd like to say that I really appreciate your site. So far, I've found a lot of interesting things to read and learn. It's great to read other people's tales of true hauntings, because in a way, it's like sharing war stories with other veterans. These tales, if nothing else, really make a person think. I've always religiously believed in the supernatural. Too many strange and bizarre things have happened in my life for me not to. These are just 2 of the more interesting ones that I hope you and other readers will find mystifying and enjoyable. During the summer of 1995, I lived in Washington, D.C., where my father had rented an apartment suite at the Watergate. It was a very nice apartment, right across from the Kennedy Center on one side and a hop and a skip away from Georgetown on the other, and since the apartment was at ground level, had a nice fenced-in patio area just several yards away from the main pool. I was working as a White House intern and was just enjoying the first real summer away from parental guidance. After a time, however, I came to realize that I really wasn't as alone as I had thought. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms, the master and a smaller one right across the landing. At first, I decided to take the master because after all, bigger is supposed to be better. But I quickly changed my mind because, in the dead of night, I'd feel suddenly very cold and very uneasy, as if someone was standing near my bed, its dark, shadowy presence vaguely menacing. I didn't know who or what it was. All I really knew was that it was big, male, and didn't seem to like me as much as a roomie. After 2 nights of this, and getting very little rest, I moved my stuff across the landing to the other bedroom. Anyway, about this time, my roommate and best friend from college came to visit for a while and, without telling her of my own unsettling experiences, offered her the master bedroom. The very next day, she reported the same unnerving sensations. She told me that during the night, she felt someone breathing cool air on her cheek and felt a heaviness on her chest that both scared and kept her awake all night. After that, she promptly moved her things into my room as well. Since I knew what she was talking about, I graciously gave in, and the two of us were very careful to never enter that room unless we absolutely had to, and only in broad daylight. Summer came to an end, and we both got ready to head back to college. As I was in the bedroom packing, I suddenly heard her calling my name from across the landing. At first, I was puzzled because it was unspoken between us that we would never enter that room, and since we didn't have anything in there to pack, I hesitated before answering. Finally, I crossed the landing and entered into the master bedroom, calling out, "Yeah, what do you need?" When I walked in the room, nobody was there. Chilled by the episode, I went downstairs, calling my roommate's name. I finally found her in the kitchen area, the furthest part away in the house from the master bedroom. When I told her what happened, she shook her head in bewilderment and told me that she hadn't called my name and was, in fact, inside the pantry room packing up some canned goods. When she told me that, my back stiffened and an eerie shiver ran down my spine. Needless to say, we got the heck out of Dodge. An interesting postscript to this tale came near the end of 1998. My mother had been diagnosed with liver cancer in May, and in a desperate bid to lengthen her life, she had decided to become a Buddhist nun. She dressed in the traditional nun's garb and shaved her head, but at the end of September, she passed away, unfortunately. During this time, a close friend of hers was in DC, and so stayed at the Watergate apartment. She had not seen my mother in over a year, and in fact, did not even know that my mother had just died less than a week ago. She unpacked and fell asleep in the master bedroom. Around midnight, she awoke because, as she told my father later on, she felt and saw an enormous shadow sitting on her chest, cutting off her breath. She couldn't scream because of the weight, and for a second, thought she was dying. She struggled and fought, but the shadow wouldn't budge, and she finally drew in one breath and cried out for help. Immediately, she said she was blinded by a light coming from the closet door, and as the light drew closer and nearer to the bed, she felt the weight suddenly dissipate, the shadow fleeing from the unearthly glow. She opened her eyes and saw a woman standing next to her, brown robes flowing to the ground. Instantly, she said she knew it was my mother, but the only thing that made her wonder was the fact that this woman, this friend she had known for years, was shaved bald. The glowing woman then smiled gently at her and slowly disappeared. Only after this friend of my mother's had told my father about this incident did she learn that, indeed, the day my mother died, she had died with a clean-shaven head, dressed in brown robes. The second place I experienced a haunting was when I lived in a 2-story house on the south side of Las Vegas. The house was owned by a chief in one of the casinos near the Strip and was completely furnished as advertised. As I came from a traditional Asian household, my grandmother also lived with me and my father, and since he was frequently away on business, it was just the two of us there most of the time. The first week we moved in, my grandmother discovered very fine, very black sand would accumulate near the tiled fireplace, and since we didn't ever use the fireplace, we thought it was rather strange. She would sweep it up, throw it away, but the next day it would appear again. This happened for about 4 days in a row. My grandmother, bless her heart, is a Capricorn, and thus rather anal about things. She was forever checking doors and windows, making sure they were locked and secured whenever we left the house. So when we came home one day from shopping, we were shocked to see the front door standing wide open. We always came through the garage door, so it was very unsettling to see the door open, knowing we had locked it before leaving. And since the front entrance is protected on one side by the garage, we knew the wind could not have done this. Nothing had been stolen or otherwise disturbed. We ended up not talking about it because really, what was there to talk about? And put it down to a freak of nature. During this time, my father came home from his trip and stayed in the master bedroom. Now, my father is not a man that is given to sudden wild and unexplained imaginings. He's 6'2", weighs nearly 200 pounds, and is perhaps one of the most self-assured men I have ever known. But after a week in that room, he abruptly confessed to me one day that there was something else staying in that bedroom with him. He said that whenever he closed his eyes to sleep, he would feel as if someone or something was staring at him through the darkness, and he would then have to get up and sleep with the lights on. At first, I just thought that was ridiculous. I mean, the man had faced down a robber at gunpoint, and he had to sleep with the light on. I smiled and nodded, but didn't think much of it because this was Vegas, not some creepy little Stephen King town filled with outlaw boogeyman. But after he left again, and I decided to stay in the master bedroom, it had cable, I quickly changed my mind because, as I snapped off the light, I too felt something peering at me through the shadows. It wasn't the same as it was in DC. This one was just as unsettling, to be sure, but it wasn't as menacing, just very disturbing. It was almost like it wanted me to notice it, had something it wanted to tell me, and as I turned on the light, I couldn't help but feel that it also needed to do something. Finally, one night, I sat up in bed and asked it, "Okay, what do you want?" I've had some prior experience with channeling, and this wasn't the first time I had encountered a restless spirit, so I just bluntly asked it what it wanted of me so I could finally get a decent night's sleep. When I closed my eyes in exhausted semi-consciousness, it was around 3 a.m. at this time, I saw behind my closed eyelids the pale figure of a woman dressed in white with long brown hair down her back. To be honest, I didn't really believe what I was seeing, just thought it was a product of first stage REM cycle. I don't really remember what she looked like, just that she was slender and had curious stains on her white dress. She looked to be in her late 20s to mid 30s. She told me that she had been taken out to the desert, raped, strangled, and buried in the sand where the present house stood. Again, I don't know how much of this is true because I was nearly asleep at the time, but what I can say with certainty was that this spirit was obviously distressed by the manner of her demise, and I felt very sad for her. Later on, I told my grandmother about this, and as she burned paper money for my mother, a traditional act in Asian countries, she would be sure to burn some for the woman in white as well. She would burn the paper money and plead at the same time for this nice lady to not come out and frighten her while she was alone in the house. I thought it was highly amusing at the time and just indulged her whimsical actions. To me, it had been a very vivid dream, and as I was not the owner of the house, I certainly couldn't come up and dig around the property to substantiate the ghostly claims. After 6 months, the owner of the house was ready to move back in with his family, and so me and my grandmother packed up and moved to the west side. Another 3 months passed before I got a call. It was the owner of the house, and he had a very strange story to tell me. First off, he asked me if when I had lived there, did anything weird happen while I was there? Honestly, I did tell him yes, then told him about what I experienced and concluded that I thought the house was haunted. He agreed, telling me that the doors had started to open by themselves and that he would hear strange noises at night. Finally, he asked me to speak to his girlfriend because she had a most peculiar dream last night and needed to tell me about it. When she got on the phone, she told me that last night she had dreamed she had walked downstairs to the garage and met a young black-haired woman dressed in a white dress. The woman asked her if I was there because she needed to speak to me. Puzzled, the owner's girlfriend said that sorry, but no, they moved away. The woman in white had gotten agitated at the response and then asked, "Well, is the grandmother there then?" Again, she replied no, she's gone too. At this point, the woman in white became exceedingly upset and started to shout, "But I know she's there. I know, and I need to speak to her now. Please, you've got to let me talk to her." The owner's girlfriend was shocked at the desperation in the other woman's voice and kept repeating, "Sorry, but they're not here." Finally, she woke up, sweat pouring down her face, and immediately asked the owner to contact me. I really wish that I could tell you that there's a proper ending to all of this, but since I never went back to the house, nor my grandmother, I don't know what happened in the end. I just thought it was thoroughly bizarre that something which I had convinced myself was just a dream was actually probably based in some reality. Perhaps one day, I'll get the courage to go back there and tell him what the woman in white had told me. I still think about the poor woman at times, wondering if she's still on her quest to find some sort of justice or peace, and I hope that time really will heal all wounds. I just know that I've been blessed in the sense that I've been given opportunities to touch a world seldom seen by rational people, and hopefully This will not be a trend that will soon break. I also wish that I could include father's incidents that have raised my eyebrows a notch or two, but I think that I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you for listening. Oh, and by the way, my grandmother still burns paper money for the lady in white. She's convinced the poor soul will come after her if she doesn't. I was reading through your website, and it gave me the confidence to speak out about what I saw as a child. At age 12, I saw the angel of death, or what have you. I witnessed him come to a woman whom I had no knowledge of or have ever spoken with, take her away by giving her direct eye contact. Here's what happened. It was before summer in 1989. My family was poor, and we were being evicted from an apartment in Washington, D.C. We had to go to court to talk about it with the judge. In the waiting room at the courthouse in D.C., there was a woman sitting beside me with a large oxygen tank and a mask over her mouth. She was really heavy, and she wore a purple flower dress. I sat beside her. I remember I noticed her oxygen tank and wondered what was wrong with her. Then I heard a knock on the glass, which was right behind me. The seating arrangement was like the chairs were facing the waiting area, but your back was to a glass wall that if you looked through, you could see the security guards checking people in through an x-ray machine. I looked up when I heard a knock. 3 knocks. Then I looked up, and so did the other woman with the oxygen tank. We looked up at the same time. The angel of death looked at me with eye contact, then looked directly at her. He stared for about 3 seconds at both of us, me first and then her. When he looked at her, she wheezed a big then she fell on the ground in front of her chair. People, adults, started running to her and they said, "Get those kids out of here." And I just kept saying, "You did not see that man scare her?" Then I looked down the long hallway. He walked down and only saw his long black coat that looks like what judges wear. A black hat, black cape or cloak, and black shoes from the back. He did not look back and his arms were swinging. When I ran to catch up with him, he was gone. The security said no one came in with all black on, and they insisted I was crazy and to take me home. I still remember how he looks. He was a medium complexion black guy that was medium build and was older looking. The woman was white. This is a true story, and I'm not just saying that because I want you guys to believe this. It's because it is true. Thank you for reading. This is only one example of an encounter I had in a house I lived in. My daughter was only about 6 months old, and my husband and I were living with his parents at the time. On one particular morning, he had left for work, and I decided to lay on the couch until my baby woke up. I left the door to the upstairs open as well as our bedroom door, so I could hear when she woke. I fell asleep on the couch. Shortly after I fell asleep, something woke me. As I opened my eyes and looked up, I saw what appeared to be someone wearing a black hooded robe, going towards the stairs. I watched the figure. I sat there frozen, turn and go upstairs. At this point, I was freaking out. My baby is up there. I got up and started running towards the stairs, and I yelled for my mother-in-law to help. She was sleeping in the room off of the dining room. When I got upstairs and went into the nursery, my baby was lying there, limp with her eyes rolling in the back of her head. I grabbed her and ran downstairs. She was lifeless. We put 7-Up soda in her bottle and forced it into her and left it for the hospital. By the time we reached the doctor, she was okay. No one could explain what had happened. When they looked at her at the hospital, they thought we were nuts. She was laughing and having a great time, getting all of the attention. So, what was that? Had I beaten the angel of death? Or was she in trouble and that spirit was warning me? Whatever it was, thank God I still have my daughter. A little after 8 p.m., I was in bed, exhausted and waiting for my husband to come back from the kitchen with snacks. I dozed off for a few seconds, and when I opened my eyes, I saw a hunched over figure carrying what looked like a walking stick. He was standing sideways, so I saw his left side only, but his hair was gray and mussed, and he was wearing a ratty, moldy-looking cloak around his shoulders and partially over his head. As I stared, he just faded away. It was really disturbing. I didn't know if it was a dream or what. My husband came back a few seconds later, and I didn't know what to do. Finally, I told him, and he joked that it was the Angel of Death. I thought he looked a little like the guy from Akalog, Jethro Tull cover, but not quite. The next morning, my daughter told me first thing to call Dad immediately. His older brother in Italy passed away that morning. I asked what time, his time and our time. I saw him about 4 hours before he passed. The strange thing is that even though there are 11 children, the only other sibling, another brother, passed away 28 years earlier, on the exact same day. I've not seen him again, but I've experienced visits by scent mostly, and he has visited a few times, mostly to tell the other siblings to call Italy and take care of his widow. I had spent time with this man, and he really liked me and even gave me a memento of his. I believe he somehow knew I could see things others couldn't. He knew I could, and did, carry out his message to my husband and for him to make sure his siblings stay in touch with her, too. Oh, and by the way, he did have a stick that he used to carry with him. Upon ever thinking of the paranormal, my initial feeling is fear. I'm not, maybe never will be, comfortable with my encounters with the supernatural. I've always been what you would call overly scared when it comes to the subject of ghosts, but that doesn't stop the supernatural from paying my frightened self many visits. For some odd reason, most of my encounters have been while being just in the midst of falling asleep, or they will wake me out of my sleep. For this reason, I've always tried to convince myself that they were just my imagination. I've come to cope with the fact that they have been happening more frequently. The past homes I've lived in have been older homes, so you would think that if I were having encounters, the history of the home would be to blame. But I now live in a newer home, and I'm recently being visited by a close friend of mine who passed away almost 2 years ago. My first encounter when I was about 13. I was lying in bed, almost asleep, when I heard what I thought was my little sister talking and playing in my room. I told her sternly, "Holly, get out of my room." But when the little voice and rummaging through my belongings in the corner didn't stop, I opened my eyes only to see that the little voice wasn't my sister's. It was a little girl whose face I couldn't really make out, being that she was a little ball of light. Some of her features were distinctive, but I could clearly tell what was happening. I jumped out of my bed and ran for dear life. My mother is a big fan of the supernatural and always says, "Elizabeth, you should try to talk to them if you see them. Ask them what they want." Is she crazy? My first experience made me run, much less strike up a conversation. We eventually moved into a much older home where I experienced a lot of lights turning on and off by themselves and the frequent sounds of someone walking up and down the hardwood stairs. But I grew used to it and never had any more visual experiences until recently. My closest friend, Morgan, passed away in a car accident almost 2 years ago at the young age of 18. I believe that she hasn't crossed over because she is confused. Her life was taken so quickly that I believe she is lost, and she is now visiting me. She has come to me 2 times in the past month, and I have a feeling that she's going to come again. Anytime I have an encounter, it scares the wits out of me. Again, this encounter came in the midst of falling asleep. I was actually having a dream about her, and I don't know if it was a noise that woke me up, but in my groggy state, I opened my eyes, and someone was standing in front of me. I know it was her, but couldn't make her out. I heard her talking to me, but it was very muffled. I was scared to death, of course, so I closed my eyes and tried to fall back asleep, blowing it off as my imagination, until I woke up. The same night, I was having yet another dream about her. I'm a very light sleeper, so any noise, touch, etc. will wake me up. While dreaming of her, I popped awake instantly while catching a chill and having something touch my back in the dead darkness of the night. I tried to scream, but nothing came out, so I hugged my infant son closer and went back to sleep. My way of dealing with my encounters is to be very still, if you call that dealing. I would like to not be so fearful of the supernatural, much less my best friend. Please help if you can.